Love it. Okay, Jamie, what's tip number 3 for us today?
Okay, tip number 3 is beware the distraction addiction. And I'm going to be a bit cheeky here, Craig, if you don't mind. I'm going to apply this a little bit to young people and then to adults as well, if that's all right. So if we take young people, so I've been very lucky, obviously, in the sense that I started this new role. I'm kind of following around my wonderful colleagues as they're doing their final observations of new teachers. And it's actually been a while since I've sat in the back of a classroom and been a sort of invisible presence. And it's just absolutely fascinating. I'm a real kind of people watcher anyway, but actually just looking around a classroom while someone is teaching, you just notice the scale of that attention kind of deficit and just how much young people are looking to distract or be distracted. And it's like, I suppose it's like putting you in an open plan office with all your best mates around you and then trying to talk to you about something you might not naturally be inclined or interested in listening to. And I actually think it's one of the biggest challenges that we face as teachers. And again, I'm going to get political, but here in Scotland, obviously, there's a kind of fetish of giving young people iPads and all that sort of stuff. So every child in the Edinburgh Council, where I am, has been handed an iPad. And, you know, you're sitting in the back of the room and you're watching these magicians on this device managing to switch over to all these and then flapping them away when anyone comes near. So I think you've had lots of brilliant people on already who've talked about this, about the ways to kind of harness attention and the ways to reduce that distraction in a lesson. But again, for me, we talk about books, so I'm a big Cal Newport fan, and this idea of kind of, I guess, minimalism applied in the classroom. A minimalism of channeling attention, a minimalism of even what young people have got in front of them. You know, why would they have an iPad in front of them if it's not conducive and part of the learning conversation? And why would we have a PowerPoint packed full of all this different stuff if it's not conducive and adding to the learning and channeling the attention? And obviously I'm kind of planning out this new curriculum for this teacher training year for English teachers. And I think for me that's going to be a massive driving force. You know, how are you managing the attention of young people in the room? And then to apply that to adults, I think is quite an interesting thing, because I'm now in an open plan office, and first couple of weeks I was kind of like, oh my, I can't handle this. I don't know what to do with this. And I think as adults it's fascinating, and as teachers, because I've gone from kind of, you know, that teaching a full timetable, 2 small boys, I didn't have any time, literally no time whatsoever. And now I've gone to this environment where I've got all this time and space, and certainly for the first few weeks I'm totally pontificating. I'm on Twitter, I'm all over the place, my mind's all over the place, my attention is fragmented, and it really got me thinking about actually, as an individual, how am I going to channel my attention so that I am doing that kind of deep work that Cal Newport talks about, and how am I going to make sure I'm planning and scheduling my time so I'm productive? And I think it's a really healthy and helpful conversation to have with teachers. Like, you know, other than the school timetable where you're dictated by a bell, how are you scheduling the rest of that time to make sure that it's impactful and it's having a positive impact on young people? Where is that time going? Is it going in places that is helpful and healthy? And then there's another fantastic thing which Cal Newport talks about, which is the kind of shutdown mode, where you know, at the end of the day, you have a time where you put everything off, you put it away, and that's it. And you kind of walk away from it. And I think that's also a really important thing for teachers to apply. So sorry, Craig, I've rambled my way through that, but two strands to it, I think.
Jamie, I've been waiting for somebody to talk to Cal Newport about for about 7 years, so this is perfect. So I'm loving this. Right, so a couple of things. Let's split it up into the kids and the staff, because I think that's a really useful distinction. So first thing to say, just there on open offices and open classrooms, every time I visit a school and I see an open classroom, I just think this is a disaster waiting to happen. Obviously it was a big trend, wasn't it, about maybe 7 or 8 years ago when all new school buildings were being up. Let's have these open classrooms because that's what Google does and so on. I've yet to see a lesson where that open plan has done anything but cause problems, because you've got kids looking around. There's one school, I won't name it, that I've been doing some work in. They've got not just open plan classrooms, but they've got open plan classrooms on kind of 3 different layers. So you can be, if you're in the middle, you can be distracted to the left, the right, up or down. Wherever you want to look, there's distractions waiting for you. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. iPads, right? Okay, here we go. So the more I see of this, the more I'm convinced that any benefit is dwarfed by the potential costs. So I was in a lesson, again I won't name the school, and I was, just like you, I like sitting at the back and watching the kids. More and more I like to watch what the kids are doing versus watch what the teacher's doing, particularly with this focus on attention. So the kids all had iPads because it's school policy that the kids have iPads in each lesson. But a lot of the teachers, they don't say it, but I know they're probably thinking, I don't want to have to use these iPads. And they're almost kind of trying to shoehorn ways to use them. But I was watching one lesson, and I'm looking around, and the teacher's chatting about arithmetic sequences. You've got one kid who's on Google Earth walking through Central Park in New York. He's having a great time on the iPad. You've got another who's managed to crack open some painting app and he's drawing like a smiley face and whatever. But my favourite, you had 3 lads, and I thought, well, they're engrossed. And from the front of the room, the teacher's probably thinking they're really concentrating here. They're watching Top Boy on Netflix. So I don't know how they managed to get that. So yeah, and of course you can get all these apps to block what they're doing and you can track what they're on. But I just think, I would say 90% of what you can do on an iPad, you can do on a mini whiteboard without any of the extra costs and a lot of the potential benefits. So yeah, I'm, as a technology lover, for exactly the reason you say, I am really, really sceptical about the impact it has on attention and on learning. So just a quick ramble about iPads there. But now, this is what I wanted to talk to you about. Right, okay, here we go. So just like you, I love a bit of Cal Newport. I'm a big fan of the deep work idea. I like his idea that it tends to take like 90 minutes seems to be the optimal time to be kind of studying on a task, because you need time to kind of get into that deep focus mindset, and then you can only sustain that for so long. And I often think, how often do kids get that opportunity in lessons to kind of, go deep? It's kind of like 5 minutes on this task. Well, it's going to take you 5 minutes just to warm up and get that focus, and how can kids get deep? But the big dilemma I've got is, I'll watch classes like you do, Jamie, and I'll see kids who can't concentrate exactly as you describe. And often the advice I give to teachers is, right, what we need to do is we need to keep switching things around. So short, sharp tasks. So let's ask them some questions on mini whiteboards, then let's switch to working in books, then let's switch to talking to partners, because the switching helps keep them focused. But then I read Cal Newport and I think, well, no, that's the exact opposite, because we're teaching them not to focus by constantly providing this variety and switching. But it almost seems like can we train the kids up to focus in that way? Is school conducive to that? Or do we think, and what's the cost of getting them to train, to do it that way? How many frustrating lessons are we going to do where we're constantly saying, no, concentrate on this, concentrate on this? Or do we just say, no, we can't do it in school, so let's constantly do this kind of switching to make sure we get as much out of them in lessons? Now, there's my ramble for you, Jamie. I don't know if any of that makes sense, but what do you make of that?
Not a ramble at all. Really, really interesting. Really, really interesting point. So, I mean, I guess the fundamental thing is what we're considering, and we could spend hours on this, but we're considering, about practically how should lesson time be used, and how can that be employed to harness and grow young people's attention. Now, we're not going to be able to have kids in the secondary context for 60 minutes, like little mini Buddhas, kind of writing in solitary silence for the full hour. And we need to be practical about that. And I think your advice you're giving to teachers is obviously brilliant in the sense of, I think there needs to be a balance. Yes, you need to have those periods where you are switching attention, you're doing stuff, you're keeping the pace going, and it's you know, it's a way to explore some of the key content in there. But then also there needs to be periods where we are having that attentional training. And you know, if I consider, you know, I'm a bit of a running obsessive, so this is really boring, but for example, this morning I was doing kind of mile reps, where I'm running a mile as quick as I can, and then I'm having a couple of minutes of blah 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 blah. But I am training the capacity to run a bit faster. And I think as teachers we need to think about, right, how am I training the capacity to manage my students' attention? You know, where is that in my pedagogical toolkit? And for me, I think it's a massively underrated thing to get kids doing little blocks of silent work. You know, it doesn't happen often enough. And I know I've harped on about this for a long time. I didn't do it well enough in my own teaching. But, you know, just a 10-minute block where it's not silence as a punishment, it's silence as something celebratory. It's silence as we're going to have a go at doing this for 10 minutes. This is the reason why we're not going to have any noise in the room. And having that conversation, because I'm really keen for you to develop your skill in working individually and concentrating. And there's almost, you know, to get a bit on my kind of pedestal about this, there's almost like a moral responsibility. Because to talk about another book, but Sarah Blakemore's The Teenage Brain talks about actually the kind of development of the teenage brain. And they are like obsessed with instant rewards and looking for those instant rewards. And they get it all the time outside of the classroom context because they've got all these social media sites, etc. So actually thinking as teachers, right, how can I give them a kind of space where they're outside of all that technological battering and they're outside of all that peer pressure that exists and all these other things that are complex about being a young person, and instead actually giving them a space to forget all that and actually just concentrate. And they love it as well. Sometimes they just love spending half an hour writing or doing something quietly, because it must be bloody exhausting being a teenager at the moment. Really, really hard. So my turn in a ramble there, Craig, but I hope some of that is
it's great stuff. And I'll tell you what, I wish I mentioned running, because I could talk to you about running all day, but we'll save that for another
we're in trouble here, Craig.
podcast. But let me just make one more point about this. Let's switch to the staff side of things. So I think you made a really interesting point here that as full-time teachers or any kind of teacher, a lot of our time is scheduled. We need to be at a certain place for a certain time to teach a lesson. We have to be on break duty for a certain time. But maybe we do have these blocks of time, whether they're PPA, kind of protected periods, free periods, or maybe we arrive into school early or stay late, where we've got this potential block of time that we can focus. And I'll tell you a massive mistake I used to make, Jamie. Now, I wonder what you make of this. So I used to love getting into school early as I could. This is pre-kids, obviously. So I could get a good old block of time, you know, an hour and a half before anyone else is in, and I could plan lessons or mark books or whatever. But inevitably, what I do, the first thing I would do, I would log onto the computer and I would check my email. And as soon as you check email, it is game over. Because then all of a sudden, you've got 3 or 4 emails, and option 1 is you respond to them there and then you've got a problem because that's eaten into your chunk of time. Or option 2, what I used to do is to think, okay, I'll ignore those, get on with my work and respond to them later. But it's nagging away in your head there. It's already taking up a bit of your attention, thinking, oh God, I've got to respond to this later and blah, 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 blah. And I think, again, Cal Newport writes about this, right, that emails have the potential to be absolute productivity destroyers, attention destroyers, and so on. And I just think, looking back at it now, what I should have done, and it makes so much sense, is I should have gone in, sat down at my desk, not gone anywhere near email, certainly not cracked open Twitter, because that's another potential for disaster, got my block of work done, and then any free time left, that's when I'll look at emails, and that's when I'll look at Twitter. Because I really I forget who said it, might have been Newport, said that as soon as you respond to emails, you're working through somebody else's to-do list. It's not your to-do list, it's what somebody else, and it could be several different people, have sent you things on their to-do list for you to sort out. And what happens then is you never get a chance to work through your order of priorities. You're always kind of firefighting and responding to other people's. So teachers are very time poor, but any precious time they get, you've really got to focus on what you want to do at the potential sacrifice of what others want you to do. So that, again, that's it's ramble after ramble, AJ. I don't know what you think of that.
No, I love it. I think it's so important. And I'm like, I drive my wife, for example, my wife up the wall with this, because I'm a total like Luddite when it comes to any form of technology interfering with stuff. So my phone, for example, I've got like no apps on there. I don't ever check anything on my phone. The only way I can access like Twitter, for example, is I have to log in and I have to do it on a computer, and I'm dead strict about when I do that, the times I do that, so I don't touch it the weekend, for example, because that's not time for that particular thing. And people go, oh, you're a total weirdo, but ultimately, if you don't schedule this stuff, if you don't dictate when you're going to do it and how you're going to do it, it dictates you, and it's the same with email. I hated it when I was teaching and a little email would ping up and you kind of go, you're scurrying off to your laptop like a little beaver, when really the attention there should be focused on how am I teaching these young people in front of me. That's my responsibility at the moment. And I think you're absolutely right in the sense of, as teachers, we should be thinking, let's block it off. There's 30 minutes, I'm just going to lock myself in a cupboard and mark books for 30 minutes. That's all I'm doing. And I'm not going to let my attention go anywhere else, because if my attention does go anywhere else, I'll get sucked in, because you can get sucked into so much as a teacher. And I'm sounding like I'm good at this, and I'm not. And that's why I kind of was thinking through this, because I've moved to this new job where my time is not dictated. And now I have to go through this process again in terms of finding the best way to work and be productive. And I think it's a conversation and a journey that all teachers should be going through. How can I work best to be productive? Because then you can cut things off and focus on the other aspects of your life, which are more important, like parenting. How can I be present for my children and not be thinking about the bloody email that my head of department sent at 5 o'clock, if that makes sense?
It certainly does. I'll end on this. There's a guy I used to work with for many years, and he refused to, I don't think he even, well, he certainly had a school-based email address, but he'd never checked it. And his point was always, if it's important, they'll come and find me. And he was the happiest teacher I've ever known. And I thought, you know what, there's probably something in that.
Fantastic.